Oké. Microfoon aan. Word ik gehoord? Ja, intussen wel. Goed, we gaan beginnen. Welcome. We're going to start. It's going to be about Latin America, but we are going to talk in English this afternoon. My name is Edwin Koopman. I'm a journalist working on Latin American affairs, and I'm going to be your host this afternoon for the debate linking Latin America, organized by a long list of organizations, but there are two representatives of them who are going to have a short welcome for you. So may I invite Thijs Berman of the NIMD and Alice van Ark of CNV Internationaal for the short welcome. It's up to you.
All right.
Ik kan deze microfoon pakken, ja.
Thank you, Thijs, also for giving me the first, being the first speaker. I would like to welcome you all. I think we are, all the organizing organizations are very proud to host this event and to have all you here in this room. And I also have to say, this is our first, at least as CNV International, this is our first live event. And what we have learned since COVID is that we are also very good in organizing webinars, right? I think you probably all have learned a lot during the last 1.5 years. And even though we have now a live event, we have you all live in this room, we thought it is a good idea to also use the technology to have even more people with us. So also a very warm welcome to all of you who are here following us live from their home office, because we are broadcasting this event live. So there are probably also a lot of people watching this from their homes, from their offices. So also a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Alice van Ark. I'm director of CNV International, and we are organizing this event today together with all of the organizations you already see on this stage. And some of you are already here since 1 o'clock. We have showed a movie about the trade union work in Guatemala. And I personally think it's a very impressive movie, and it gives us a very good insight of how important it is to have people like trade union leaders, that you can also call human rights activists, that you have people like trade union leaders that stand up for the rights of other people. And it's still important in the Netherlands, but even more in a country like Guatemala. And I hope it has inspired you for all who has seen this movie, and please otherwise watch it from your own home when you go back home. It's really worthwhile watching. CNV International has organized this event because we are worried about the developments that we see in Latin America, about the developments that we see in the field of CSR, social responsible business conduct, and the developments in human rights violations in Latin America. I'm told I have only 7.5 minutes, exactly. I don't think I will use them all, but I want to give you a few highlights and tell about the things that we're going to speak about today. I want to raise 3 issues. The first one is the trade relationship with the Latin America region. There's an urgent need that we focus more on Latin America, being the Netherlands, being the EU. And why is that? Because we have a lot of exports. There's a large export relationship that we have with the region. We export a lot of raw materials from Latin America to the Netherlands, to Europe. And at the same time, we also see a lot of labor rights violations linked to the EU, linked to European companies. But however, our influence is really declining. If we don't act now, the influence of China is only increasing and increasing, and our influence is decreasing. And it will put the EU at a disadvantage. But there's also a huge opportunity for us to do business more responsibly in Latin America. We already have the trade relationship with the region, and we already are extracting raw materials from the region, and it can be done more responsibly if we do something about it. The second topic is the trade agreements. There are already trade agreements with the EU and Latin American region, and this offers a great opportunity because in these trade agreements, we think it's important, and it's already being done, that there are sustainability chapters. So the EU already commits to doing business more responsible, but the problem is these trade agreements are not monitored because the civil society who needs to monitor these agreements cannot really function very well. And also the complaints mechanisms do not seem to function very well. And we think it's very important to act upon these, to really implement these trade agreements. Also because we think we should not only export raw materials from the country, from the region, but we also think the local community, the country itself, should benefit from it. So there should be local added value created in the country. This is the European standpoint, but it's currently not really implemented. If we leave everything to the Chinese, what will happen is they will only source from they will only look for the lowest price. The Latin America region will think, okay, the Chinese don't ask all these difficult questions about sustainability. We just offer all the raw materials to the Chinese. Don't be so difficult, right? So we need to offer the country something, and I think the EU can offer really something that is the local added value. If you, for example, now all the materials aren't processed in the region, but are directly exported to other countries. And if you add also, say, as an EU, if you make a policy that also local value needs to be created, you make a big difference also for the region. Another point I want to raise is, even though Latin America, for a lot of people, is maybe far away, but actually, Latin America is very close to our country. Latin America is only 30 kilometers away from Venezuela. Only 30 kilometers. It's not far. You can even see it from, if you are at the border, you can even see Aruba. And you may, so did I say something? Aruba, sorry. I say Venezuela from Aruba, yeah. It's only 30 kilometers away. So Venezuela is so close to our kingdom, to Aruba, we cannot neglect that country. Currently, 4.8 million people are fleeing Venezuela. Because of the government, because of all the human rights violations, and they're also fleeing to Curaçao, to Aruba. So we can't really neglect what is happening in a country like Venezuela. CNV International is currently working with a trade union called ASI, to ensure that all the recommendations from the ILO are also enforced in Venezuela, that human rights violations and labor rights are respected in the country, and the trade union here has a very important role to play, and I'm proud that as an organization we can still currently support this trade union to do their work. So these are my 3 points. I would also like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their support in organizing this event. This is very important for us. We see all these things happening in the region, and we are happy to see that you also have offered your support. And I also would like to thank all the organizing organizations. We have a lot of speakers today that you will all hear about. We even have 2 members of parliament. Thank you very much for being here. We have Ruben Brekelmans from the VVD, and we have Jorien Buiten from D66. Thank you for being here. I would now like to ask my colleague Thijs to come on the stage and to take the floor. And well, thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon. And I hope you will learn a lot and hope we can together also get to some conclusions on what we all can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. No, excellent. I don't know whether you are surprised, but I am a little bit surprised that so many people are here. Is this the post-COVID nostalgia of social gatherings, or may we hope that Latin America, yes, does evoke such an interest? I hope it's this interest. What we at NIMD see in the over 20 countries where we work is that 20, 30 years after the fall of most dictatorships, initially there were high hopes on what democracy would bring, not only the right to vote, Article 19, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also social equality, equal chances, the possibility to make your dreams come true, wherever you come from, whoever you are. These high hopes have, in many countries, been crushed by the vast inequality that persisted: corruption, bad governance, plundering of natural resources, unequal treatment of people who happen to live in areas where mining could occur. This is not only true in Latin America, but also in Africa, in other countries where we work, not only the Latin American countries, but also African countries. So we can learn a lot from the good examples of what also happens in Latin America. We can learn a lot from our NIMD national directors from Colombia, from Honduras, from Salvador, from Venezuela, who are here. And in Colombia, for instance, we support the dialogue between the population and the city of Bogota. And the restoration of this democratic process is essential, because this disillusionment leads to populism, to autocrats getting their chance. And it's not only a privilege of poorer countries that this happens, it is also in Hungary, it is in Poland, and even in the Netherlands. The fact that there is such an incapacity or unwillingness to solve the problem of the gas damages in Groningen, or to solve the problem quickly of all those people, 56,000 families who fell victim to this harsh and incredibly unjust treatment by the Dutch fiscal system because of the childcare subsidies. If you don't tackle this quickly and adequately, you undermine the very credibility of the democratic institutions of this country. If we don't take this seriously enough, you will get more populism, you will get more of this. And yet we know that democracy is the only system that can guarantee a fairer situation for most of us, tackle social inequality, diminish violence, diminish crime, diminish conflict, Even better healthcare is brought about by democratic systems, better than in autocratic systems. So we have an urgent need to restore confidence. And because of this situation in the Netherlands, it's even more urgent to listen to what our Latin American colleagues can tell us. So I wish us a great afternoon, and it will be an interesting afternoon, and it's timely. I hope that you see I think you see the urgency of this. Let me thank also the organizations that are not listed on the banners here. It's not only CNV International or Free Press Unlimited or NIMD, or where's both ends here. It's also PAX. CEDLA is not with a banner, but very important. Nicaragua platform obviously also is one of the co-organizers of this afternoon. Enough for me. Enjoy the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Thijs and Alice, for your introductions. As you can see in the program, we are going to start our debate with two special guests. One of them is Carlos Dada, who came from El Salvador, the prestigious Latin American news platform El Faro. We'll come back to him later, but because we start with Barbara Hogeboom. She is a professor of Latin American Studies at the University of Amsterdam and also the director of the CEDLA, the Center for Latin American Research and Documentation. Barbara, welcome. She's going to talk about the changing relations between Latin America, US, EU, and China. Nothing less. You have 15 minutes, Barbara. Good luck.
It will be a miracle. Thank you, Edwin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just not sure, is this working? Shall I use that for flipping through the slides? Yeah? Okay, I'll try. Yeah. I'm going to talk about how China is important for Latin America, and at the end, I like to raise a few questions for our discussion, also for the rest of today, what the role of the Netherlands, what the role of the EU should be in these recent developments. But let me start with that core subject, the changing relationship of China and Latin America, or the changing role of China in the region. You can say, can start with kind of good news. The region has another important economic partner. I think for a region that is still in a lengthy process of development, that is good news. So there is a widening of that relation. There's also a deepening and a changing nature of that economic relation. But there's another side to that, and we are already quite aware of some of the negative effects and the concerns around that increasing influence, economic influence of China in the region, and also a little bit like, is China trying to kind of catch the fish of Latin America? Let me show you a few slides just to give you a bit of that bigger kind of global picture. Clearly in trade, and Alice also talked already a little bit about it, China is now a key partner. Let me focus especially on South America in some of these slides, because we will have another presentation on Central America in just a minute. But what you can see is the country that are red, they have China as the #1 export destiny, and for the blue countries, China is #2. So clearly for selling your produce to the world, China is of key importance. The US still is quite important. And that, of course, also has to do with the importance of that market for Mexico, for Central America. So to give this kind of bigger picture, you see, yes, in many ways, the US for the region as a whole, including the Caribbean, the United States is still the key trading partner. China is a very important outside other countries, so the luck is there in between. And the European Union is still a key player, but not that important anymore, especially with that increase of trade with China. Also quite known and also already mentioned, if you look at the export of the region to China, almost 90% of it is in raw materials. So it's agricultural commodities and, well, metals and oil and other, how do you say? Yeah, but I'm looking for another word, sorry. Minerals, that was the word I was looking for. So if you kind of, have the 34% and the 53%, that is much more than what Latin America exports to the world in general. So there is clearly this predominance of raw materials when you look at the exports to China. And yeah, it is also a bit different than what China is actually exporting from the world. So there is a kind of an imbalance or a certain characteristic that we need to keep in mind. So this was a bit the kind of the trade picture. Now, China is also an important investor in the region. It has been, for the past at least 10 to 15 years. Investments in mining are very well known. So this is a picture of Las Bambas in Peru, one of the largest copper mines in the world, which is operated by a Chinese company, where a whole, village had to be relocated, where the mountain that you see there, that kind of, copper mountain, will be gone in 20 years when all the copper has been extracted. And as we know, there are in Chinese projects, operations in these kind of mines, sometimes more problems than with other companies, other foreign companies, regarding labor rights, human rights, relations with the local communities. I'm not going to say that that is a particular kind of Chinese characteristic. I think also in many other mining operations, mines, we see these kind of problems, and the Chinese companies have also been learning, but you still see that partly also because of cultural, political differences, language differences, Chinese companies tend to have, sometimes more tensions locally and also with communities and workers than other companies do. Now, this jumps. It's not so easy to see clearly what investments of China, what is the size of it. In this overview, you see China as the number 2, and what is most relevant is the light-colored bars, because that is for the past 10 years. Here you see China as a quite prominent foreign investor in the region. But then if we go to this other picture, here we get a very different impression. Actually, you don't see China there on the right side at all, which is pretty funny. We see examples from a few countries, so let's just take Brazil. Here you see Europe, the European Union, is still very important for investment in Latin America, the 2/3 of all the investment. So what happened with these Chinese investments? One of the problems, or one of the realities, is that usually Chinese investments go through third countries. 80% of the investments from China to Brazil are going through third countries. And interestingly, the Netherlands and Luxembourg are some of these examples of countries that are those third countries where this money flows through. So we have even more connections than we may be aware of. And I think also when we really discuss if we like to change something about, for instance, corporate social responsibility, maybe there's also a kind of indirect role for the Netherlands to be played. Okay. A few years ago, it became also clear that China is also an investor, a provider of loans, of credits to Latin America. So suddenly, especially in 2010, there was this huge amount of loans from the China Development Bank, from the Export-Import Bank from China, and that was a much larger sum than what the World Bank, here it says IBRD, which is the official abbreviation, but the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and CAF were actually providing as credits to Latin America altogether. This has been, it has gone down a bit, and especially you see that in the past few years, this is not like a continuous trend, but it's important, I think, to count with that, Latin America also benefits from that increased interest of China in the region with having more access to loans. the downside or the concern around these trends is also whether all of these loans are kind of smart investments, and there have been some concerns about the kind of unsustainable debts that certain Latin American countries have accumulated as part of these trends. And I think, well, we talked already briefly about Venezuela. I think the amount of loans that it got, especially from the China Development Bank, is a problem for Venezuela. At least a lot of that money was not spent wisely, so it is indebted now. On the other hand, also for the Chinese banks, you know, a crisis like that in a country where you put a lot of money is not a very good development. Now, let me move now to 3 or 4 more recent trends. Basically, the Belt and Road Initiative, I think, is known to all of you. Many Latin American countries don't have, of course, you know, they don't have that landline, so there's not that road, but there is this kind of, you know, bridge over the ocean. So many countries have already projects, or they have MOUs about their involvement in the Belt and Road Initiative. And especially there's a trend to invest more in different infrastructure, so not just the ports and the highways, but now also, for instance, a lot of investment in electricity. So, of course, the electricity production and the whole grid in Latin America, that is key for economic modern development. And there's a lot of Chinese investment going there at the moment. I think Chile is an important example. More than 50% of the electricity transmission is now controlled by Chinese firms. But also the Belo Monte hydro dam in Brazil, the connection from that dam in the Amazon to the southeast of Brazil that was constructed by a Chinese company. So China is important in these connections, in hydropower, in wind projects, in solar projects throughout the region. So that is clearly a different, importance, a different role of Chinese companies and finance in the region. Let's move to the digital Silk Road. So that is telecom, that is e-commerce. Here in the picture we see a donation of Huawei to the Congress of Ecuador. So they were given computer equipment. Those kind of donations, not just in the case of China, but in general, are of course usually part of a bigger pact where you have a kind of a deal where you start to have more collaboration, loans, and longer-term interactions. So this is very clear in all kind of digital projects. As you can see here, there are different MOUs again. Didi is really strong in, so that is the Uber of the kind of Chinese Uber. It's really strong in Latin America. I read that something like 600,000 cab drivers in Brazil now use Didi. That may be, kind of also good to have not a kind of monopoly of just Uber and have, again, kind of more diversity. But here also there are some concerns. One of them is, the fact that the Chinese, I have to check what is the full name, China's national intelligence law that was installed 4 years ago obliges Chinese companies to turn over material that can be of strategic or kind of state security importance. So when it comes down to having all this access to information of people moving from one place to another, imagine kind of, political meetings, gatherings, whatever, that information that is in the Didi apps and whatever, that can be, kind of the Chinese state can demand from the company to give that information over. So state official meetings, political meetings, that can be kind of, it can be sensitive information that doesn't seem to be very well protected. There are other issues. I could try if this works. Yeah, the safe city or smart city. There are several projects where there's Chinese security cameras, among others in Argentina and in Ecuador, where there's now concern like where that information, you know, is maybe kind of captured or whether it is shared. There are large Huawei cloud projects, so that again also kind of captures a lot of information. And of course, in the past few years, there has been more concern with that kind of strategic information and whether that's safe. And then this one in the middle, the submarine fiber optic, that is also quite interesting. So there is now the construction of various submarine cables from the west of the region to Asia, of key importance, of course, for information flows. China, especially again, Huawei was having quite a big role in that construction initially, but in the end, the concession was granted to a Japanese firm. The Chinese were not amused, but probably, so this is going from Chile to New Zealand and then to the rest of Asia. Probably there was some kind of interference from the US to kind of, you know, not grant that concession to a Chinese company for some of the concerns that I mentioned. So this is another important trend. And now let me move to the third one. The kind of, you could say the vaccine diplomacy. There is clearly a big need for still a lot of vaccines in Latin America and also for improving healthcare. And many Latin American countries see that China is there offering to sell often, so that's why it's business, it's not just donations, apart from some very poor and small countries, but most of the Chinese Sinovac and, this one. So the number one vaccinations from China is mainly, you know, just Chinese companies selling this or even producing it in Latin America. But it is clearly a tool that is used also by the Chinese government. So much more effectively probably than US or EU, who are kind of working together in the COVAX program, but don't really show like, you know, it's our kind of vaccines reaching Latin America. China is much more doing this, showing its role in combating COVID. And also, for instance, in the small country of relatively small country of Uruguay. Recently, a loan was granted of $10 billion US dollars to support in the COVID response. And there you see the connection, because Uruguay is now considering a free trade agreement with China, just as already Chile and Peru and Costa Rica have. They have free trade agreements with China. So now Uruguay is considering this. And there you also see how, you know, sometimes the COVID combating is connected to other interests, economic interests. Now, what to think, what to do with these trends? If we look at increasing geopolitical tensions between the United States and China, in a way, it seems like, you know, the region is there in the middle of that force or in that magnetic field, which I think is not a good thing. I mean, some people already start talking about a new Cold War. Let's hope not. But I mean, the previous Cold War was, of course, devastating for Latin America. So I think that is not a good place to be for Latin America, but I also think that therefore it's really important that Europe and the Netherlands start relating to the region in a different way, and at least not kind of be part of that polarizing or confrontational kind of setting which seems to appear. It's of course not just a battle. I mean, there's the Belt and Road Initiative reaching Latin America from the side of the US and other members of the G7. There's the Building Back Better initiative that could also offer opportunities for the region. But I think it's really important that from Europe we do something differently, and already have been mentioned a few important reasons why that partnership, that existing relation between Latin America and Europe, why it should be strengthened, because we come from a community of values. Latin America really is a Western sub-region, like North America or like US and Europe. US and Canada and Europe. Democracy, human rights protection, also attention for environmental protection has been historically quite strong. As I have shown, there are mutual economic interests between Europe and Latin America. But I think it's also in the interest of both Europe and Latin America that there is a global balance of power or a multipolar world. So in that sense, also the connections between Latin America and Europe could and I think should be strengthened. And one of the ties which I partly see from people here in the room is also there have been many people from Europe working in Latin America. Many Latin Americans have, grandparents who came from Europe. They still have European passports. A lot of our students, for instance, in the University of Amsterdam, who come from Latin America, also come with a European passport. So there is a lot of these also kind of human connections, cultural connections that I think we can build on. And I think there's a role for the Netherlands to be played in also this European agenda, because at the moment, often, of course, it's Spain and Portugal that play that role for evident reasons. But I think here in the Netherlands, we have a lot of capacity to also strengthen the connection with the region and improve it in ways that actually support democracy and human rights and economic relations as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. I'm sure this inspires a lot. Yeah, a lot of people to have reactions, but we wait for that because first I'm going to invite Carlos Dada. There's Carlos. Carlos is the founder and director of El Faro, news platform. Maybe not everybody knows El Faro, but I, as a journalist working on Latin American affairs, I can say that for me, when I start to look at the news in the morning, I think the El Faro is among the 10 primary sources I consult first, and I think the first I consult if it's about Central America. So really prestigious for their impressing high standard of serious journalism. Its investigations of corruption and violence, especially. So we are especially honored with your presence, Carlos. Carlos is going to talk on the effect of geopolitical changes on the rule of law, the media, and democracy in Central America. Carlos, yes. You have your own microphone, so you can choose.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Edwin, for your generous presentation. Goedemiddag allemaal. That's all I can say in Dutch. I am the director of El Faro, as Edwin said, and we go around the world bragging that we were the first online media in Latin America. We founded El Faro in 1998. And after all these years, I still don't know how to make slide presentations. So bear with me, you will be stuck, I'm sorry to say, with a speech for the next few minutes. Thank you for the invitation to this event, particularly to Free Press Unlimited, the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy, and the CNV, for your efforts to accompany Central American civil societies and the defense of human rights and freedom of expression. Please allow me to start by expressing my joy over the recent decision of the Norwegian Nobel Committee to award the Nobel Peace Prize to Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov, two admired and brave colleagues, for, and I quote the Nobel Committee, their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. They are representatives of all journalists who stand up for this ideal in a world in which democracy and freedom of the press face increasingly adverse conditions, close quotes. It is a very important statement, which we journalists around the world would like to see followed by all those who believe in democracy and peace, particularly at these turbulent times when democracy seems to have fallen into a deep crisis everywhere, while new populist regimes increase their attacks on the press. As is often the case, the paradigm also functions backwards. If freedom of the press and freedom of expression are necessary conditions for democracy, the authoritarian's playbook for dismantling democracy also previews the suppression of free press and freedom of expression. They go hand in hand. If you take a look at the 14 chapters that make up the freedom title of the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights, it is clear that its authors understood that liberties are not a list of isolated or abstract concepts, but rather a series of aspirations and rights profoundly interconnected. Lose one of those liberties, and the rest will fall down consequently. In today's world, more and more those who want to suppress our freedoms understand this better than those willing to promote and defend them. But let me speak a bit about Central America, not only because it is the region where I come from, but also because our long historical aspirations of integration were an important source of inspiration for the founders of the European Union. And it's never a bad thing, as Alice reminded us earlier, that the Kingdom of the Netherlands is also our neighbor. There is a shorter distance from Panama City to Oranjestad than between The Hague and Stockholm. As Gabriel Garcia Marquez once reminded us, people in Amsterdam woke up one day a few decades ago very surprised to learn that the Netherlands was competing for an international championship in baseball. Caribbean Dutch players, of course. So let it be known that your neighbors in Latin America are facing a crisis of major consequences. In Venezuela, in Brazil, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, in Guatemala and El Salvador, we are now witnessing the exile of hundreds of journalists and intellectuals under attack by the new wave of authoritarian populism that has infected the region. Democracy as an ideal lies not only at the core of the European Union principles, but also found a place as a valuable idea in the Central America we started to build after the Cold War. And we started to build it with the support of the international community. Europe, by the way, played a very important role. But now both the dismantling of democracy and the attacks against the press and against expressions critical to power are increasing at a very fast pace, apparently with very few people from outside taking notice. And I think you should take notice. 4 Central American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador, are now rolling back democracy and going back to authoritarian regimes or plain dictatorships. The military have regained a political role, and all 4 countries are ruled by corrupt governments. That should be enough to worry the international community, which is more and more the only space left for Central American citizens whose rights are being violated without any chance of having a state institution to defend and protect them. There is no rule of law anymore in most of Central America. If you happen to be old enough as to remember, and perhaps celebrated, the Sandinista revolution of 1979 in Nicaragua, you could hardly recognize Daniel Ortega now. He has spent more years sitting in the presidential chair than Anastasio Somoza, the dictator toppled by the Sandinistas. The Ortega family have turned power into a personal business, and Nicaraguans today have no freedom of expression, freedom of movement, or even political freedoms. Ortega is a dictator. Since the protests that started in 2018, hundreds of thousands of Nicaraguans have been forced to go into exile. Those that remain in the country will hold presidential elections just a few days from today. No, that is not accurate. Nicaraguans will vote on November 7th, but without any real choices, without an election. Ortega banned the participation of 7 opposition presidential precandidates who are now imprisoned and tortured next to hundreds of critics, students, and journalists. The dictator will run for re-election with a result already known to everybody. Honduras. As the recent trials in New York against the brother of President Juan Orlando Hernández for drug trafficking have proven, is a narco state, where criminal organizations control not only the institutions of the state, but also the massive agro-industrial and mining projects, whose products, like African palm oil or gold, end up in the developed world industries, while the laborers live in meager conditions. Honduras is today one of the most dangerous countries on earth for environmental activists or land defenders. Something similar happens in Guatemala, with a high cost to indigenous communities whose lands are taken, contaminated, or drained for the benefits or corporations known for serious labor abuses. These were the original banana republics, but people tend to forget that those countries were controlled and ruled by those who exploited the country's agricultural production, namely 2 United States companies, the United Fruit and the Standard Fruit Company. They changed presidents in Central America and installed dictators at will. Many decades after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the WTO treaties, and subject to worldwide criticism, both companies changed names and left the lands to local landowners who only reproduced the exploitation system. La United y La Standard, as both companies are known in Central America, nowadays go by the name of Chiquita and Dole, and they buy most of the banana production from their former lands, while big food industries, many of them in Europe, buy the palm oil from those plantations. I most recognize the European interest to enhance the conditions of plantation workers, reflected in the new generation of trade agreements with Central America. But as the introduction paper for this conference stated, it is insufficient. I have visited those banana and palm plantations, and I can attest that today's workers live in meager conditions barely better than those of their parents and grandparents, working from sun to sun under what poet Pablo Neruda called the dictatorship of the flies. A seemingly unescapable poverty, generation after generation, in a vicious cycle only broken by migration, or, as their sons are now beginning to choose, joining the ranks of those trafficking packages of drugs that end up on Manhattan streets or European ports. Like those trials against Honduran and Mexican drug traffickers in New York show, the developed world acts and judges as if it had no responsibility over the drug trafficking or the intolerable working conditions of the workers at the plantations. The problem, you say, is ours. Guatemala, which a few years ago showed big advances in justice through the United Nations Commission Against Crime and Impunity, rolled back all those advances when powerful elites felt threatened right after the trial of former dictator Efraín Ríos Montt, accused of genocide. Those powerful elites found great partners in US Republican congressmen, which saw in CICIG, the commission, some kind of communism intervention and withdrew the funding. It is fair to say that some European countries, mainly Sweden, tried to keep the commission running, and they did for a while, but it was politically unsustainable. CICIG is gone. Guatemalan prosecutors and attorneys committed to the judicial reform process have been harassed, sacked, or exiled. The consequence is a reversal to the times when criminal organizations kept the state paralyzed. In Guatemala, justice is now technically dysfunctional and corruption is rampaging. My country, El Salvador. We lived until very recently in a country with many problems, but which was politically stable. The peace agreements that put an end to our civil war in 1992 and marked the beginning of our democratic life established the separation of the army from our political life and the design of an institutionality that allowed for conflict solving. The parties that fought against each other during the war learned that committing to the process was the only effective way to begin a new era, and they did it in such a way that those peace agreements are still regarded as one of the biggest triumphs of the international community. Certainly, corruption invaded the system, and social violence, as well as economic problems, expelled hundreds of thousands of Salvadorans who emigrated looking for a decent life. Frustration with politics and the incapacity of our democracy to solve the people's most urgent problems allowed the arrival of an outsider, the current president, Nayib Bukele. Since his inauguration in 2019, he has quickly dismantled our democracy and the rule of law, while keeping an enormous support from a population willing to have someone with a strong hand solving their most urgent matters. They tried democracy, and it didn't work. Most of the population, impoverished and subject to gangs violence, are betting everything on an anti-democratic and corrupt regime. What do they have to lose? On February 9, 2020, President Bukele entered Congress surrounded by dozens of armed soldiers and policemen, threatening to dissolve it. He stopped at the last minute. But he gave power to the army and the police, unprecedented in our young democratic life, up to the point where both armed bodies have refused to comply to judicial orders that reverse measures taken by Bukele. His party won the majority in legislative elections this year, and in the first session of the newly installed assembly, Bukele's party sacked Supreme Court judges and the Attorney General, effectively running over the separation of powers, something fundamental, as you know, in any democracy. The judges appointed as replacement immediately ruled allowing re-election, which is literally forbidden in our Constitution. A few days later, the National Assembly passed a new bill dismissing a third of the country's judges and allowing the new Supreme Court to move the remaining judges at will. So now Bukele controls the three branches of the state: the Attorney General's office, the army, the police, and all the judges' circuit. This means that Salvadorans have no more constitutional guarantees. Already dismantled all democratic institutionality and the rule of law, El Salvador is running to a dictatorship that may last for a long time. Its first symptoms are already visible: the harassment and prosecution of the regime's critics, the delegitimation of journalism, and public attacks against anyone who dares to challenge the regime. The Minister of Security has admitted publicly that journalists are under his surveillance, and the police has started to physically attack reporters. We are already witnessing arbitrary detentions without judicial orders, harassment and surveillance against civil society organizations and journalists. We at El Faro are subject right now to 5 revenue audits, whose conclusions were announced beforehand a year ago by President Bukele himself, in a message to the nation broadcasted on national television, where he said that we, El Faro, were being investigated
for money laundering. The 5 audits remain open, as well as 2 more criminal investigations against us. Bukele's attacks against us have gone so far as to deserve a special mention in a bill passed by the United States Congress in December 2020. The clause in that bill is now known as the Reza El Faro provision because it specifically names the now Nobel Peace winner Maria Ressa and El Faro. The bill orders the Secretary of State to cancel visas and further measures against, and I open quotes, foreign government officials involved in threatening, wrongfully imprisoning, or otherwise depriving of liberty independent journalists who speak out or publish about official corruption or other abuses, including Maria Ressa in the Philippines and El Faro in El Salvador, end of quote. Everybody at El Faro are now beneficiaries of cautionary measures dictated by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. Nonetheless, the attacks and surveillance from the government continue. Of course, they continue because we also continue investigating corruption and organized crime. I hope I have succinctly and effectively informed you about the crisis of democracy in Central America and the deterioration of the rule of law, which leaves millions of Central Americans without minimum guarantees and rights. I wish Central America returns to the public debates in the Netherlands and in Europe, because you are called to be strategic partners for our civil societies. For many years, the Netherlands had a significant presence in Central America, and its genuine interest in the region was manifested particularly through the sponsorship of programs for the protection and defense of human rights. It is unfortunate to see the diminishing of the Dutch presence and interest in Central America just at a time when our young democracies in the region are more at risk than ever before and need champions for the causes of human rights and democracy. Not long ago, we journalists gave for granted that European governments and their embassies in Latin America were ready to speak out in defense of freedom of expression and freedom of the press, which is no other thing than defending the core values of the European Union. But European embassies seem to be less and less willing to publicly defend those values abroad anymore. Soon we will be, again, walking alone. Let me close again with the Nobel Peace Prize Committee statement announcing this year's award, which, as you will find, is in complete harmony with the European Charter. I open quotes. Free, independent, and fact-based journalism serves to protect against abuse of power, lies, and war propaganda. The Norwegian Nobel Committee is convinced that freedom of expression and freedom of information help to ensure an informed public. These rights are crucial prerequisites for democracy and protect against war and conflict. I close quotes. And I agree. Bedankt.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for your striking words. I would like to invite you to stay on the stage and take one of these chairs at this side. May I also call Barbara back to the stage and take the chair next to Carlos? Since we are going to talk about relations with the Netherlands also, we are happy to have the presence of 2 MPs, members of parliament here, who were so kind to spend their time on Latin America this afternoon. Ruben Brekelmans of the VVD and Jorien Wuit of D66, democratiseringsproces. Please, could you also come and take one of these 2 chairs? Before coming back to you, Barbara and Carlos, please. Yeah. If you want to drink some water, please help yourself. There's a lot. There are glasses. This is mine. Yeah. Are there enough glasses? Yes. Okay. I would like to start with you, as you're new on the stage. Jorien, what was the most striking thing you heard from our keynote speakers?
Yeah,
Thank you for the opportunity. And first of all, of course, sincere appreciation to the organization of this event.
Thanks for coming.
I even canceled another work program as I recognize the importance of this subject. So even though both speakers had different perspectives, I really felt the story of Garo, and reminded me also of a very recent visit that or participation in a delegation that I did 2 years ago in Nicaragua for the Association of Caribbean States, where you really felt the erosion of democracy and the sensitive situation of so many different vulnerable communities in Latin American countries. So yeah, that moved me, and it really reiterated actually what is currently going on, and that we have to be very cautious as the Kingdom of the Netherlands, indeed with the closest proximity to South America, through not only Aruba as a country within the kingdom, but especially as Bonaire being a Dutch country in the region is very, very critical to recognize and therefore to focus on in order to ensure that democracies are defended and that shared values within the Kingdom of the Netherlands should be emphasized, and that indeed journalists and media requires protection, as the media is the most strongest and most explicit advocate to criticize and review and investigate indeed the strength and also the weaknesses of democracies. So I think we have to move away from ambivalence that I believe developed over the last couple of years, and really strengthen the shared values and use the opportunities of Curaçao, of Aruba and Bonaire and other Caribbean Dutch islands to further be a partner for Caribbean countries.
Thank you. Ruben Brekkelmans, also thanks for coming. You're the spokesperson of the VVD on international affairs.
Sure.
To which extent these issues are on the table when you talk in the Buitenlandcommissie, the Commission of International Affairs, or within the Parliament?
It is on the agenda, I would say, quite regularly, not as one of the key topics or the key priorities, because there are so many things happening in the world, and it's always a battle for attention, so to say. It has come up a few times because it's on the European agenda. So there is discussion about European and Latin America relations. And I think it's getting more interest and also more attention because of the geopolitical dynamics that Barbara presented, because there is this, of course, this contest between the United States and China. And I think we as the European Union, there is an opportunity to intensify our relations with Latin America again. So in that respect, it is on the agenda again, but it needs an active push because, as I said, there are so many conflicts, so many things going on in the world that it is hard to keep attention on Latin America. But I think we have to ask ourselves some very fundamental questions, because what I found quite shocking, and I already knew some of the facts, but Barbara's presentation showed it again, is that China is already so active in Latin America. So for everything that the European Union does, or European country tries to do, there is a Chinese alternative, which is probably worse on all the dimensions that we all care for, whether it's human rights, labor conditions, environmental conditions. And then we can say, okay, we keep doing the same as we have always done as Europe, and try to stimulate and encourage our standards to Latin America. But if the result is that Latin American countries say, okay, we leave the European Union aside and we choose for the Chinese alternative, then we are worse off in many ways than Latin America is worse off. China's better off because they get access to all the natural resources and they make us dependent on them as well. And we in Europe are also worse off. So I think those are some fundamental dilemmas and questions that we need to ask ourselves as politicians, but also all you practitioners working in the field. What do we do if Latin American countries do not want to accept our standards and choose for the Chinese alternative?
That's a point I would like to come back to you, Barbara, because if we look at your presentation, well, it looks like everybody, especially China, is moving around Latin America, and we are losing influence, as Alice van Ark started with this afternoon. To which extent do you think or feel that these human standards or this responsible trading standards of Europe are a blockade for having more influence in Latin America? In the sense that the Chinese maybe do business without questioning anything.
Yes, they do much more often business when they see indeed economic opportunity, and of course many of these companies also have a more long-term perspective, so they take longer-term risks or more risks. Yes, so if you would consider just the kind of economic side, you would maybe say, okay, let's kind of trade a little bit our standards, so we still, as Europe, have a role to play. But I think that would definitely be the wrong way around it. First of all, because I'm very concerned about what's happening in Latin America as well. I think a little bit what you were talking about, it's not, what you see is that countries that decide to, leave aside a lot of the democratic institutions, have fake elections, votes without a real election, those kind of procedures, they can indeed still have the economic ties and also agreements with Chinese government or with companies, where at some point indeed the EU or the Netherlands will say, okay, we're not going to, have a partnership with you under these circumstances. So there, I think it is where also the topics kind of cross. Maybe indeed what Ruben is pointing out is also really important. So you can think, okay, just the kind of economic interest of Europe would be to have those economic relations with the region. But since we are talking about countries that most of them, at least for some time, had democracies, democratic institutions, also a large share of the population that likes to have that kind of political system, who value human rights, if we kind of start forgetting a little bit about our environmental or human rights or political standards, in the end, you are also building a world in which, those values and those standards will also be lowered. And I think that is, in the end, what we don't want for ourselves, we don't want for the region, and we don't want for the world either. So that is where I think there is also a mutual political and social interest to build on what was there, and not kind of start having trade agreements between European Union and Latin American countries or Mercosur, where we give up on those ambitions.
When I ask the question the other way around, what makes China so interesting for Latin America if compared to Europe? Why would they prefer? I mean, we see the influence growing, as you showed on the slides. Why would they prefer China for Europe?
Sometimes because it's easier, because you don't have those requirements for corporate social responsibility. Sometimes because it's simply the money is there and it's not coming from a European country. It's not like a constant competition. It's just another game, another possibility that is out there. And I do think that what I showed in the trends, like with this digital Silk Road, so also the kind of very modern or new kind of infrastructures and technologies. This, the Chinese companies being very willing to work there. I mean, at the moment, for instance, the traditional infrastructure market in China is not going well. So the Chinese companies are very actively searching for global markets. But also in this, I mean, we're talking about a region of 650 million people, very young population, very urbanized. So if you think about, digital infrastructure, that is of key importance for the region. And there they find that there are much more Chinese companies at the moment kind of quickly stepping in. Mm-hmm. And I think some European partnership or maybe also the companies themselves, I mean, political partnerships or economic partnerships will be needed to show that there's also really a interesting offer from our side.
Mm-hmm. Carlos, you showed us a very inside view in what's happening to democracy in Central America. To which extent do you think that Europe could link its geopolitical interest in Latin America with the human rights situation in your country or in the region?
I mean, I've always seen Europe not as a geographical region, but more as an idea, right? Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the European Union here, not about the continent. The European Union is an idea, is an ideal. So it's grounded on values. It's values that make up Europe. It's not anything else. And it seems to me that in the last years, the conversation has all shifted to economy and earnings and what do we get from there? It's all about the economy. I don't hear any more conversation about values, about the core values that made up this ideal that is Europe. So why is China so interesting in Latin America? Let me refer briefly to this question. I think it's what in the US universities they call politics 101. We have always been subject to the will and the power of one single power, which is the United States. Flirting with China gives Latin American countries leverage to negotiate with the United States or with Europe or with anyone else. We have leverage now. So my country is a good example of that. When President Biden came into the US presidency, he tried to do something that was obliged for him, which was to recover in some way the moral authority his country had lost. It was trashed by the Trump administration. So he came with a foreign policy that reminded me of the Carter administration foreign policy. It's a foreign policy based on principles, right? The two Biden principles, at least for Central America, were the fight against corruption and the consolidation of democracy. My country is going against those principles, of course, and so the Biden administration fell into its own trap for two reasons. One was that the Salvadoran government found that it only needed to mention the word China, and everybody in Washington would go crazy. And suddenly, my very small country was a very important country again, which it was not since the war years, right? President Bukele, from my 20,000 square kilometer small country, was received with state honors in Beijing. Yeah. And then the Biden administration said, hold on a minute, I think we can have a conversation. Let's meet again. Let's rephrase the terms of our conversation. And there was another reason for that, which is migrants from Central America. Right? If you let the Central American countries fall, you will only have more migrants knocking at the southern border of the United States. And migrants are not a foreign policy problem for the Biden administration. It is a national problem for them. It is a national policy problem for them. So not only Bukele, but the Central American countries have learned now how to play with this and how to obtain more leverage from this. It's Guatemala with Russia. It's happening right now. Is also Nicaragua flirting with Russia and China. And Nicaragua is not that important in the radar of the United States because Nicaraguans don't go to the United States. They go to Costa Rica, so it's not an internal problem. So that's why I think China is more and more attractive to the Latin American countries.
Thank you, Carlos. I see you nodding all the time, so
I recognize
please.
Yeah, I recognize because I lived on St. Martin in the Caribbean for many years, and I've seen and witnessed these developments for the last decade, actually, where even therefore on St. Martin or Aruba and Curacao or other Caribbean islands, you see indeed the inroads that China is making in opportunities to invest in infrastructure or to buy land and to develop in the respective economies of our Caribbean Netherlands countries, such as in tourism, in apartment buildings, and other kind of real estate. So that development has been ongoing for a while, and it has to raise, I think, in its urgency, which you expressed today. You've seen it also in the AIV report, which recently was concluded last year, where actually the Kingdom of the Netherlands has neglected the Latin American and Caribbean region for too long. And I believe that the one-sidedness of economic interest is a very risky one. And I think the investments in shared values in interest of of democratic principles needs to be emphasized. I think that we run the risk that if we want to play with economics, that we may be on the losing end of the stick, and then it's particularly for the Caribbean Dutch islands risky if we don't curve this trend.
Mm-hmm. Before going to the public, I suppose, okay, I guess there are some questions or maybe remarks. Do you think, Ruben Brekelmans, that human rights and democracy should be part of treaties and be, let's say, before going into trading with Latin America?
Of course, I think it's a bit old thinking to say it is economics versus other values. The point that I was trying to make is that if we don't have any economic relations with Latin America anymore, then the alternative is China. And then we know one thing for sure, that for all the standards that we consider to be important are going to be even lower. And you already pictured a very bleak view of what's happening in Central America, but it's happening in other countries as well. And that's the unfortunate reality that we are facing right now. And what I'm saying is that if we want to keep our economic relations, but also if we want to improve on environmental standards, on labor standards, on everything, then if we set the bar too high, then what you just see is then that countries take the alternative, and that's China. And then we are even worse off. And I think that's a fundamental question. So if you look, for example, just make it very simple, scale from 0 to 10, we would probably say our standard is 8 or 9. China says our standard is 2 or 3. Maybe we should lower our standard from 8 to 9 to 7 or 6. Otherwise, we end up with 2. It's not something that I like, but that's what the reality is. So, and I think we have maybe different answers. Some people would say, let's keep 8 or 9 because that's where we are. But maybe then if you give your presentation in 5 or 10 years, then we will even see bigger investments and bigger trade relations with China and Europe and United States even being less relevant. That's not something that I would like to see, but I am very afraid that that's going to be the reality.
So it's interesting you say that because you do concessions to your own standards. What do you think of this, Carlos?
Well, as I said during my presentation, I keep hearing that it's our problem, that there's no co-responsibility of the developed world in our situation. Right? It's like, who is buying all the palm oil from those plantations that I described? Right? It's not a matter of standards only for values. It's of co-responsibility. It's not a condescendence to our country, so you can give us a helping hand for people to live better. You are also co-responsible. You Europeans are also co-responsible of the situation in the Latin American countries.
Yeah. Thank you. There is a microphone going around, so if there's any reaction or question to any of these participants, please go ahead. Lift your hand and I can see, and also the microphone can go there. Yeah, please. There are 2 people. 1, 2.
Hello, my name is Maria Angelica. I come from Colombia. And just a quick question is, how can we raise awareness towards what is happening here in the Netherlands, but also to get together to do something about it? But awareness not only here as a debate, but also to mobilize the people that care about Latin America. Thank you.
Create awareness. Where shall I go? Start with you?
Well, this is thank you. This is the first step, I think, that you raise awareness in the center of power here at Nieuwsport, and indeed also involvement of political representation. Of course, my colleague has is spokesperson for foreign affairs. I'm the spokesperson on media and on kingdom relations, so that is different. So we take it from a different perspective. But I do think, for instance, what I also exchanged and consulted with Free Press, whether there's a possibility to create, for instance, initiatives such as a safe shelter, and not here in the Netherlands, but also closer and closer proximity, and use the fact that the Netherlands is therefore in the region to create these type of hubs as safe havens for journalism. On one hand, when you see indeed these developments as Caro described, with the risk of journalists and freedom of press and freedom of expression, do that, since we are the closest as a European country to the South America. So that could be one initiative, that you create a safe haven for journalists in closer proximity as an initiative from the Netherlands, and that you use, for instance, or not use, that you do that in partnership with the Caribbean islands, Dutch islands. Secondly, you could also use and see and explore possibilities to partner, also from a foreign affairs perspective, to further build capacity in terms of training initiatives and other type of initiatives to further strengthen and encourage matters of investigative journalism or freedom of expression and freedom of press. So those type of initiatives I think can be done from my perspective as spokesperson for Kingdom Relations, where you can create inroads to discuss matters and the fundamentals of democracy and how they can be pillared to create more stability in the Caribbean, Latin America, and the ECLAC region, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think those are two examples, maybe.
I see one of you nodding, yeah?
Very briefly, I think one of the things you need to do is also to show how there is a linkage indeed to us. So like us as consumers, but also like the risks of leaving these kind of developments that are maybe, you know, in a smaller Central American country happening, which is not attracting a lot of attention from the general Dutch public. But if you try to show what are some of the regional and also global patterns and the risks for also us in the end, I think that is important, because I think if it's just about, you know, this one country somewhere in Latin America, we all find this very interesting, but the general public isn't that aware or concerned. So I think it's also sometimes good to see where it connects to also interests for our society in the end.
So another question. Is this, yes, more or less what you expected? Yeah?
My name is Enrique, I'm from Nicaragua. So I have a comment more than a question, and it's that I see a kind of a false dichotomy in this idea of standards at 2 or 3 with China or 8 or 9 with Europe. And I think that a great example of that would be Costa Rica, an outlier in the region, where you see that because there's a strong democracy, I find that this dichotomy negates the agency of our societies in these relations. So it's not so much US, China, Europe, it's also from where do we negotiate, from where do we come into these relations. So I think that that's a big part of the argument for investment in things like media development, social or civil society relations, bilateral civil society relations. And I think that it's really important to have a focus on how we strengthen not democracy as institutions, as rule of law, but democracy as people being sovereigns. And Costa Rica is a society where that's very much ingrained, and I think that's why they can navigate that much better than the rest of the region. So I think that dichotomy is too simplistic.
Can I?
Yeah, please, Breekman.
No, I'm happy that you bring this example because I think there are a few countries in the region who are positive examples. Costa Rica is one of them, maybe Chile, maybe others. If that was the standard in the whole region, the whole of Latin and Central America, then I wouldn't have said what I've just have said. Then I would have said, you can clearly see there is a positive trend of increasing standards when it comes to labor standards, human rights, environmental standards, and everything. But unfortunately, that's not what we are seeing. That's not the story that you're telling. Also, when we look at Brazil, when it comes to the environment and also the political situation, but also other countries, unfortunately, it is getting worse. And it's not that China is the cause of that, but China is having a negative impact from that, and the impact is even bigger. So that's why I made my comment, but I think that there are indeed positive exemptions that we can learn a lot from. And especially to get to understand better why is Costa Rica and maybe Chile, why are they choosing a different path, and how we as the European Union can encourage that, not only in those two countries, but in other countries in the region as well.
Ja. Jij? Ik hoorde iemand, mag ik wat zeggen?
Ja, ik zei wel.
Goed, ik zie daar een hand. Marlies en Maurice.
Yeah, hi, thank you. My name is Maurice van Beers from CNV International. Just a comment on trade agreements and the importance of those and what to do with the European trade agreements with Latin America. I think we should, the most important thing, if you want to compete with China and be interesting for China, for Latin America, I'm sorry, then you should just comply with the intention of the purpose of those trade agreements, because they were designed to be sustainable and not only to export, to get importations from Latin America based on extractives, but also to impulse and to stimulate a sustainable development, which have an aggregated value also in the supply chain in the countries themselves. And that's not happening. We are in the civil society advisory groups of the different trade agreements, and what we see is that it's still mainly extractives. So you have a discourse on human rights, labor rights, and environmental rights, but you haven't anything edited to offer to the region. Then it's very easy to go to the Chinese because they don't complain and they offer the same money buying extractives. But if you really offer something else, what already is in the trade agreements, then you can be competitive. It's not about competing on price, on being the most cheapest. It's competing on value and on quality, for example, what makes us different as European countries and European companies, for example.
Thank you for the intervention. I saw,
Can
there are two people. Oh, yeah.
Now,
short reaction.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, of course, and it would be great if more of those economic activities could take place in Latin America as well. One reality again, and I'm just saying this to encourage the discussion, is that if you mine materials, then the first step in processing those materials is very dirty work. It's not something that many people like to do, and it's also something which is very difficult when it comes to environmental standards. So what we now often see also in Africa, Latin America, is that those materials are exported to China, and that very dirty work is happening there. So if you say we want to have more of these early stage activities in Latin America, that creates all sorts of new dilemmas regarding labor and environmental standards as well. But that would be the easiest step. If you want to do even more like value-adding activities, then of course it also requires something when it comes to education and when it comes to innovation, and you need to do a lot of investments in order to, in those activities, also compete with other countries. So I completely agree with what you're saying, but unfortunately it's not so easy.
Thank you very much. Now, finally, Marlies.
Thank you. I'm Marlies. I'm the director of Impunity Watch. I wanted to get back to the issue of protection, and you mentioned the shelter city as a potential option to give a safe space, for example, for journalists. The point that I want to make is that it's so important for the European Union to become better in how do we protect those who are at the forefront of fighting against impunity and corruption in their own country. What we're now seeing in many of these countries is how people, are in the forefront, independent justice operators, are being criminalized, they're being pushed out of their positions, they're being pushed into exile. Before, in the past decades, the European Union and the Netherlands were quite good in protecting, speaking out when these things would happen in the country, to protect people in these functions. This is what we now see almost not happening anymore. And this is really weakening, I think, the function of these people in these crucial positions who in adverse conditions speak out and try to keep these processes ongoing. So my call would be for the European Union and for the Netherlands to look back at how can we better protect people so we can prevent people having to go into exile, one. And secondly, because our priorities have changed, so there is much less money available to civil society in these countries. If we have co-opted state institutions, state capture, then civil society is our only option to fight back, and they continue to do so. But they're basically dying because there's no resources anymore. So the importance to rethink the role of civil society and to create resilience with a long-term vision on how do we make change happen. Thank you.
Marlies, are you saying, thank you, are you saying we should strengthen civil society in order to make, let's say, governments there also more aware, or maybe in order to create an atmosphere or an ambience that they find, let's say, that the governments prefer to do business with countries which have human rights and democracy on a high level? Is that what I understand from your words?
I think civil society in many of these countries is very strong. They have the knowledge, they have the capacity. The problem is that they don't have the resources to make their voices heard. So this is why we need political allies to give them the space to be heard on the national level, on the regional level, on the international level. So it's about giving space, it's about giving resources, and it's about sending out the message that civil society is now our best bet to keep in place this very important fight against corruption and impunity in Latin America.
Ruben Brekelmans, what would the VVD think of this idea of strengthening civil society in countries like Central America? In Central America?
Yeah, of course, an easy answer would say I agree, because I would love to see civil society in Central American countries getting better. Again, the reality is that in many countries in the world, whether it's in the Middle East or Africa or Asia, we see the situation when it comes to, for example, journalism or other human rights is getting worse. So we have to make choices when it comes to spending those budgets. And if the situation in the world is getting worse, and we also want to improve the situation in Middle Eastern countries and African countries, yeah, then it's very hard to keep up the budgets as we already had. The underlying question is, of course, what are the underlying reasons why civil society is having a difficult situation in Central American countries, and why isn't there enough budget if the European countries are not willing to give that? Why aren't there no alternatives? I think those are also questions that need to be answered. I think it would be very easy to say, and I don't think that's what you're saying, but it would be very easy to say, okay, if European countries give more money, then the problem is solved. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There are many other issues as well, and I think we have to discuss that also.
Thank you. I see a very big clock here in front of me, obviously warning me that we are over time. I would propose, let's say, to go like 10 minutes more and then maybe start the sessions 15 minutes late, something like that. Then we have still 20 minutes of a break, because I see more reactions. One of them, please.
I'll be very brief.
Thanks.
I'm an Euro-American person. One of my parents is European, another one of my parents is Latin American. My name is Philippe Velez McIntyre, and I represent citizen diplomacy. I'm part of that group. I lived in Colombia for 11 years. And I was just thinking that it would be important to read Eduardo Galeano's book, Con las Venas Abiertas. And there you would have an answer about all the people who tried to take responsibility, who tried to inspire the responsibility, and who were silenced in one way or another. Thank you.
Any of you? Or shall I go to the last intervention or question from the public? Yeah? Is the last question or remark? Just the opposite of the room.
Thank you. Peter van Dijk, Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in the Netherlands. I work on agriculture and on trade. Now, what we see is that the countries in Latin America, they ask us for assistance on their regional trade. The same as here. We trade most with Germany and Belgium, and we are now seeing the effects of the United Kingdom's Brexit. The same is true in Latin America. Most of their relationships are with their neighbors. Also in economics, also in people to people. And I'm not hearing that discussion here at all. We are being approached. The ILO is being approached. The World Trade Organization is being approached for requests helping the Latin American countries between them to talk and discuss production standards, including social and environmental matters. Do you think that the pesticide-infected sugar they want to eat in the neighboring country? I don't think so. The consumer organizations in Latin America are developing as well. So these things are happening, and I don't hear any discussion on it. I wonder why.
Maybe relevant.
Anybody? Why?
I think because we all see it as something positive. Because we in Europe, of course, we have good, as you were saying, we are in that respect in creating an internal market. We are an example, and I think we have tried that in African regions as well. And I think it's very positive that we do this in Latin American countries too. I think that there are then, I think trade tariffs and, as you were saying, and other standards are one issue that is now impeding internal trade. But I think also infrastructure. So the infrastructure within countries is sometimes quite okay, but it's all towards the capital. And then if you look at the infrastructure, whether it's roads or rail from one country to the other, it's much worse. So it probably also requires some investment there. But then also, as with every infrastructure investment, you get all the difficult questions about the environment and stuff like that. So I think then if we go deeper in that, then there would be another discussion. But I think there is an opportunity there to also for us as from the European Union to help in those investments in infrastructure.
Barbara?
Yeah, I agree with that last part, indeed. I think it's something that we should really prioritize much more, and probably more on the European level. I think also trying to help and strengthen CELAC, which is this region-wide platform, but is sometimes rather weak or fragmented. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I just read that interview with Monica Sidian-Ho, the director of Klingendaal, who identifies some fields where in Dutch foreign policy and European foreign policy, we seem kind of blind of all the things that are changing at the moment in the world. And one of them is also the prominent role of China. I think China is very aware of these needs in the region, and they sometimes have bigger pockets, or at least it's more centralized than in Europe it is. But I think we really need to rethink what we want to offer with attention also for the values that we find so important, but also find more funding for this relation with the region and with other parts of the world where similar, of course, challenges are happening. I think we've been looking a lot at trade agreements and adding a few things to them, but I think at the moment what is very important is to have a stronger European agenda on these kind of interregional connections, on not just the kind of economic interest, but the bigger development challenges.
Thank you, Barbara. Final small remark from Carlos, last words.
No, I don't want to have the final words. I just want to say something, Edwin. I think that as you are, Edwin, I think that we are both very privileged people in the sense that we have the opportunity to be and talk to a lot of people that very few professions allow to do this. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with two Dutch parliamentary members. And last month I was with displaced communities in the northern of Honduras, right? And there's very few people that have the chance to meet both worlds. I'm not an expert on trade, sir, I'm sorry. I am just an expert on reporting stories and editorial processes. But I do see people that most of you people don't see, right? And I see how they live. And I see how they are still trapped in this cycle of poverty that they have been trapped for generations and generations. And the world changes, but their situation doesn't change. They still don't have access to health systems. They are still subject to the will of the owner of those plantations. That's in Guatemala, the cases that I saw. In the case of Honduras, these are displaced communities by wealthy Honduran families that took over their lands to plant African palm oil. That's what I know. That's what I see. Those are the people that I see. I can tell you a lot about the northern coast of Honduras and how it is controlled by organized crime, particularly drug trafficking, which are the same people in charge of the African palm oil plantations. So that's why I didn't speak about trade. I don't think necessarily it's all about money. It's not only about, I mean, believe me, I'm not European and I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm just telling you, it's not, I don't like to see our countries just, stretching their hands asking for money. First of all, we would like to be listened, right? We would like to tell you what our problems are, not you telling us what our problems are. And second of all, I think, as I said, it would be very welcome to listen again with a strong voice, Europeans defending their core values. That's all I say.
Great, thank you very much. Great. Thank you, Carlos, for coming here. Thank you, Barbara, Ruben Brekelmans, and Jorien Wuiten for being here. We have a break which will be shorter than planned, I think like 15-20 minutes, and then we go on with breakout sessions. There are 3 people here who will try to convince you to go to their breakout session in one sentence. Maurice van Beers? Yeah, Maurice.
Yeah, the nicest breakout session is about trade. It's going to take place over here in this meeting room, so just go out and get your drink and go back. We are going to talk about, listen to somebody of Colombia who is an expert in the trade agreements and the monitoring of those, and he will tell you about what's really happening and what's really the contribution of those trade agreements, so we can learn how to be more attractive in comparison with the Chinese. Then we have a primer. We have the presentation of a report of Handel Anders on Mercosur and what are the risks of Mercosur and what's happening really on that side. And last but not least, we have the presentation by Somo, and we'll discuss it as well, on what's happening in the case of just transition, if you're talking about carbon in Colombia, for example, and what the effects are those, and what are the responsibilities in due diligence related to just transition.
Thank you, Maurice. Marlies, you are leading another breakout session. Please keep it short.
Yes, I'm leading the breakout session on rule of law and how problems with the rule of law have an effect on corruption and on organized crime. We'll have chocolate in our group, so I will definitely...
That's a convincing argument. And to end with Helene Schrooyen, which is the last breakout session.
Thank you very much. The breakout session I'm leading is about inclusive democracy and also about the process. So why do we see what's happening in Colombia, in El Salvador, in Nicaragua? So if you want to hear more from Carlos Dara, please come to my breakout session, which is here in this room next to this one. Yes. And then I also wanted to ask your attention for something else. One person who would have definitely co-organized this event is Adrie Kemps. And many of you know him. I only had a chance to know him very briefly, but I was very impressed by him. Because one time, a few years ago, we were organizing an event similar like this one. And it was Friday afternoon, and he called me, and he said, I just spoke to Bianca Jagger. She's coming. And I thought, oh my God, this is the way I want to grow old. Like him. Not losing my enthusiasm, but still believing that things can be changed. So for those of you who want to say something to Adrie or to his family, we have his picture and some cards there. And I think his family would really appreciate if you could leave a message for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Helene. Thank you, everybody. Have a short break. Try to be at the workshop at 4:45. And then after that, we meet at the drinks at 6 o'clock. Thank you.